We continue now at the top of Daf Samach Zayin Amid Beis in Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 67b. On the previous summit, the Gemara was discussing both Meiruach Ovid Kochavim and Gilgul Ovid Kochavim. Meiruach Ovid Kochavim refers to a pile of grain that was smoothed out while it was owned by an Ovid Kochavim. There's a machlokas tanoim over there, whether that pile of grain is chayiv in Trumas or Maasros or not. And there was a question with regards to Gilgul Ovid Kochavim. That's the mixing of the dough of an Ovid Kochavim. Is that going to be chayiv in Chala or not? And Rava said that the same machlokas tanoim which exists by Meruach Ovid Kochavim, that applies as well when it comes to Gilgul Ovid Kochavim. And the Gemara in the previous summit asked on Rava from two brises, and the brises there seems to be a clear distinction that even though by Chala we say that Gilgul Ovid Kochavim is going to be exempt, but still we're going to say that we're strict when it comes to Meruach when it comes to Meruach Ovid Kochavim, when it comes to Trumas and Maasros, and there is an obligation in Trumas and Maasros that goes against what Rava is saying. According to that, it seems to imply that even according to the one who says chayiv by Trumas and Maasros, but there's still going to be an exemption when it comes to Chala. And on the previous summit, the Gemara answered that the inferences drawn from those brises do not mean that there's an obligation of Truma on a Doraisa level. It's just an obligation of Truma on a Durabanan level, and the reason was because of wealthy individuals. Wealthy individuals essentially would take advantage of the fact that Meruach Ovid Kochavim is an exemption, and therefore, since they would take advantage of that, we say on a Durabanan level, there's an obligation of Truma. And the Gemara therefore continues now and asks, if so, if there's a Durabanan obligation by Truma, so Afilu Chala Nami, wouldn't we say the same thing by Chala as well? We should say by Chala as well, that Gilgul Ovid Kochavim, at least on a Durabanan level, there should be a Chiyuv. Rashi explains, Zihachi B'Chala Nami, Ligzor Gilgul Nami, Misham Bali Kisim, we should make the exact same Gezerah because of the wealthy. Why is it that we make the Gezerah only by Truma, and we don't make it by Chala? And the Gemara continues and answers, the reason why we don't make it by Chala is because there already is a loophole that's so easily used by Chala that it doesn't make any sense to make a Gezerah, because Efshar Da'afila Pachos Mechameshes Revam Kamach, it's possible simply to bake less than the amount that's obligated in Chala, just bake less than the 5 quarters of flour, V'od, and then a little bit extra, that's the amount that's chayiv in Chala, and that's a way simply to get out of the obligation of Chala. Rashi explains, Efshar Da'afila Kalamar Lahachilo Gazrinan B'Chala, means to say the reason we don't make any Gezer by Chala, if a person wanted to find a subterfuge, they can easily find when you simply bake less than the amount that is going to be obligated in Chala. But the Gemara continues, well, if that's the case, Truma Nami, when it comes to Truma as well, there are other ways of getting around the obligation of Truma. After David look at Rabbi Oshia, it's possible to do what Rabbi Oshia suggests. The Yamar Rabbi Oshia, because Rabbi Oshia says, so a person can make a subterfuge when it comes to his grain, his crop, he can bring it in while it's still in the chaff, in order that his animal will eat from it. That's like a temporary kind of eating. That's a way to exempt it from Meiser. Inami, or there's another way. If you bring it into the house, not through the front door, but through the roof, or you bring it in through the karfif, which is an enclosed area, that's not the front door. So there also, that's a way to get out of Truma. So what's the point of making a gezerah and say that Meruach Ovid Kochavim is chayiv in Truma, because otherwise people will use that as a way of getting around it. There are other ways around the obligation of Truma. And the Gemara continues and answers, Hasam over there, when it comes to Truma, Bifarhesia, those are things that a person would have to do, Bifarhesia, out in public, and Zila Be'mil, so that's going to be something that's like a disgrace to that individual. He's not going to want to use that kind of subterfuge, and therefore it makes sense to make a gezerah. But over here, when it comes to simply baking a little bit less dough, Bitzinitz in private, Lo Zila Be'mil, it's not something that's disgraceful to the person, and therefore, again, if there's an easy way to get around the obligation, there is no point of making a gezerah. And Rashi explains, Da'afila pachos meheravam kemach v'yod, you just bake less than the 5 quarters of flour and a little bit more, D'lo mechai b'chala, then there's no obligation of chala. D'zeu shir isa l'chala, isa l'chala. This is the amount of dough that's chayiv in chala b'Meseches Erevin, b'Peraketzan Mishtatvin. This is in Meseches Erevin. And now in terms of the ways around the obligation of Truma mentioned by the Gemara from Rabbi Oshia, there are various explanations. Rashi explains, b'motz shelo, again in the chaff, ke'ein meichel behema, you bring it in a way that you would feed it to an animal animal. Umaychul behema pater min meiser, and food that's for an animal is pater from meiser. Lishna achrina, another explanation, b'mot shala, when it says you bring it in b'mot shala, it just simply means shalo yira pnei habayis. That's another way where it doesn't see the front door of the house. And then another way around it, derech gagos, bring it in through the roof, derech chatzeros, through courtyards. De'in tevel mukval a meiser, tevel is not established for the obligation of meiser, ad she'ach nisu derech hashar, until you bring it in by way of the gate. T'chsiv, as it's written, v'yachlu b'sharecha v'saveyu, it says b'sharecha, by your gates, u'v'meiser k'siv b'perek hasocher sapoalim, and hasam, and then the Gemara answered over there, b'mots, u'v'derech gagos, farhesya, zila milsa, if he's going to use these, if he's going to employ these methods of b'mot shalo or derech gagos, so that's already farhesya, it's in public, zila milsa, it's a disgrace, sheyom ruploni marim lemiftamri meiser, everyone's going to say this person is doing this just to get out of meiser, hilkach avid lehu al yedei ovdei kochavim b'tzina, therefore, what he'd rather do is he'd do it through an ovdei kochavim privately, and that's why they make the gezerah. But hachagav echala hapachos mechameshes revoim v'yod, here where it's chala less than the amount that's obligated, tzinohi v'lo zila be'milsa, it's in private, it's not something that's disgraceful. Hilkach lo avid al yedei ovdei kochavim, therefore he's not going to do it through an ovdei kochavim anyway. He has a way of getting out of it in any case, and that's why by chala there's no point of the gezerah. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah. The Mishnah is continuing to explain the process of the Omer. Bolo le'isarn, he comes to the isarn of flour that's going to be used for the Omer. Nasan olav shamno levonoso, he puts upon it the oil and the frankincense. Yotzak, he pours. Uvalal, and mixes. Heinif, he waves it. Vehigish, he brings it close to the Mizbeach. Kamatz, he takes off the fistful. Vehikter, and he burns it. Vahashar nechal kohanim, and the rest is eaten by the Kohanim. Mishakarav Omer, from the time the Omer was brought, Yotzin umotzin shuk Yerushalayim, they'd go out and they would find that the marketplace of Yerushalayim, shumole kemach kali, that it was filled with flour, it means to say it was filled with the new flour, and kali, it was mixed with the oven-dried grain, again from the new crop, and that was shelo b'ritzon chachamim, that was not in accordance with the will of the chachamim. Divrei Rabbi Meir, these are the words of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, no, b'ritzon chacham hayuos, and this was in accordance with the will of the chachamim. Rashi explains, Bolo le'isaron, no sein etchila shamno levonoso, yotzak ubalal, again he put the oil and the frankincense, poured it, mixed it, shekein derech kala menachos. This was the process by all carbon minchas. Sheno sein shemen tchila bekli, first oil would be put in a vessel, v'achar kach no sein soles, then one would put in the fine flour, v'chozer v'yotzik ola shemen uvola, then he would pour some more oil and mix it, kedamar v'perek elo menachos. All of this is explained later on in elo menachos. Hinif v'higish waved it and brought it close, damrinun v'perek kala menachos. We said earlier in Parakol Menachos, we said the Minchas Omer Tuna Tnufa V'Agasha, that the Minchas Omer required waving and bringing close to the Mizbeach. And Rashi continues, the Mishnah said, Mishakara V'Omer, when the Omer was brought, and the point is miyad, immediately from when it was brought, Kishayotzim, when they went out, Motzin Shukei Yerushalayim, Meleos, Kemach V'Koli, Mitvuah Chadasha, they found that the marketplaces of Yerushalayim were filled with flour and oven-dried grain that was from the new crop, and according to Rabbi Meir, that was Shalo B'Ritzon Chachamim, that was not in accordance with the will of the Chachamim. Why? Because we're afraid that maybe when the person was harvesting the new grain, and that harvesting certainly took place before the Omer was brought, so maybe he'll end up eating some of it. Then he's going to end up eating chadash from the new grain before the Omer. Now, if we already see flour that's out in the marketplaces, we know for sure that it was harvested before the Omer, and that's why this was problematic. The idea that there would be flour in the marketplace this soon, it means that it was harvested earlier, and if it was harvested earlier, there's a concern that it was eaten. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, but Rabbi Yehuda says it's not a concern. The lo gazar shema yochel. He doesn't make a gezerah that maybe it's going to be eaten. And the Gemara says, v'lo gazar Rabbi Yehuda dil ma'asi l'meichel minei. Does Rabbi Yehuda really not make that gezerah that maybe the person's going to come to eat from it? Or a minu, but we have the following contradiction, and this is from a Mishnah in Meseches Psachim. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, bodkin or arba asar uvar asar shacharis uv'shas abior. We do the inspection for chametz. We do it on the night of the 14th. We do it on the morning of the 14th, and we do it b'shas abir at the time of the destruction of the chametz. V'chachamim omrim lo badak, and the chachamim say if one doesn't check, etc. And Rashi explains, bod kim chametz, we do b'dikas chametz, uv'shas abir, we do it at the time of the destruction, meaning b'shah shishis. That's in the 6th hour of the day. Aval mikan v'elach, the point over here is that from that point in time forward, lo yivdok, one should not do any b'dikas chametz. Afilu lo badak bizmanu, even if he didn't do the b'dik at the right time. Why? The gazrinan misham dil ma'asi l'meichel k'shemotzi b'pesach. We're afraid if he does b'dika, he might come come to eat from it when he finds it on Pesach. And Rashi continues, V'Rabbanan pligiola, the Rabbanan argue on Rabbi Yehuda, Da'amri, because they say, Lo badak b'soch ha'moed, kolomar b'moed sreifaso, if the person doesn't check at the right time, meaning at the time of burning, Dahainu b'sheish, which is the 6th hour, Yivdok la'achar ha'moed b'soch ha'pesach atzmo, he should do bedika during Pesach itself. V'lo gazrin an dil ma'asi l'meichel minei, the Rabbanan, they do not make a gezerah, he might come to eat from it, but the point over here is, it certainly seems to be a contradiction. Rabbi Yehuda does not in our Mishnah make a gezerah that one might eat, but here in the Mishnah Psachim, he does make a gezerah that one might come to eat from the chametz. And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Rabba, Rabba says, and some change this to Rava, Rava says, Shani Chadash, it's different by the new grain, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Ches Amud Aleph.